So, hello and thanks for joining us this evening. We'll be presenting a webinar to present our proposal for Furzen Leaze solar farm. So, my name is Chloe and I'm the Head of Communications and Engagement here at Aura Power, and I'm joined by two of my colleagues. One is Andy, who is the project manager, and Harry, who's our planning lead on this project. So this webinar is just one of the formats where we'll be launching our initial proposal. We'll also be presenting our plans in person at Siddington Village Hall tomorrow, which is Tuesday the 18th of February. And we are also happy to have any separate discussions, so please do not hesitate to contact us. The slides from this webinar and exhibition boards will also be available on our website. We'll also circulate them to those on this call. Before we go into the proposal itself, I just want to explain to you how this webinar will work. So between us, we'll take about 25-30 minutes presenting the plans and then open up the virtual floor for any questions you may have for us to answer. Your microphones will be muted for all of the session, but you should see a Q&A button either at the bottom of your screen or the side of your screen. It looks like a little speech bubble where you can then type your question for us to then answer out loud. We'll only be answering questions once we've presented our plans, though please feel free to type your question at any time during this session. However, I would advise waiting till the end, just in case your question is covered in our presentation. So this webinar is also being recorded and will be available to watch again on our website. If you are watching the recorded version and have a question that has not been addressed, then please do contact us. The purpose of our consultation events is to understand local views, concerns and suggestions which we can then incorporate into our plans that we'll then submit in the form of a planning application to Cotswold District Council. We would therefore like to ask you to complete a short feedback form after the webinar, which will be sent round following this session and is also available on the project webpage. Okay, so who are Aura Power? So we are a renewable energy developer. We're based in Bristol, which is where we are this evening, despite the background, comprising of a team of around 60 people. We have numerous solar and battery storage sites in development, not only in the UK, but across Europe and North America. We are also the developers behind the solar farm at Kemble, which is soon to be starting construction. We have recently started work on the cable route for that project, which you may have received a letter regarding. If you have any questions on this project, then please do contact us separately. We are a joint venture partner of a company called IB Vogt, a German leading engineering firm that's built over 2 gigawatts of solar farms worldwide, with over 50 of those located in the UK alone. Our team prides itself on developing solar and battery storage projects to the highest of standards while protecting local sensitivities and offering a haven for local wildlife. Our aim is to build trust with local people to develop a design that accounts for local concerns and also benefits the local community. We develop projects all the way through from inception to operation, working with a number of specialist consultants and partners along the way. Our mission, we work very closely with landowners and local stakeholders to power an emissions-free world through the development of affordable solar energy. And we follow 3 key mission goals to do so. So number 1, tackling the climate crisis. Solar power provides an immediate solution to fighting the worst impacts of climate change, made easier by the massive falls in costs. Number 2, enhancing the natural environment. Our sites incorporate landscaping to help biodiversity to recover and ecology to thrive. And number 3, engaging with local communities. It is a priority of ours to work closely with local stakeholders like yourselves to understand concerns and develop the best possible scheme. So the need for solar. As we all know, we are in both a climate and ecological emergency, and it's important to recognise why solar can play such an important role in the future of the energy sector and our environment. The most recent IPCC report states that the dramatic carbon reductions required globally to avoid the worst impacts of climate change can be achieved due to the massive falls in the price of energy produced from solar and wind. Solar farms are not only a crucial part in bolstering the UK's energy supply, but they are the cheapest form of renewable generation. Electricity from solar is currently around 3 times cheaper than that of nuclear and 2 times cheaper than gas, and thus helps collectively bring down power prices for everyone. The UK government has a legally binding target to reach net zero emissions by 2050, as well as a commitment to shift all electricity generation to 100% renewable sources by 2035. The UK government has set a target to increase solar capacity threefold by 2030, and that was released in the Clean Power 2030 plan at the end of last year. To put this into perspective, you may have heard of some nationally significant infrastructure projects which were approved since the turn of our new government. These total just over 2.3 gigawatts, which were approved by the Secretary of State. And that 2.3 gigawatts accounts for just 8% of the required 30 gigawatt target. Cotswold District Council has declared a climate emergency and admirably aspires to make the authority carbon neutral by 2030. This solar farm would contribute a significant amount towards that target. The increase required in solar power cannot be achieved through rooftop and brownfield sites alone. As a result, ground-mounted solar is also needed, which can also offer a haven for wildlife with new habitats created and no disturbance from intensive farming practices. Food production can continue with sheep grazing amongst the panels, allowing the soil to rest and rejuvenate, providing a stable store of carbon and often leaving the soil in a better condition than it was before. Solar farms offer a diversification route for farmers, enabling a guaranteed revenue stream that can be reinvested into the running of agricultural activities on other parts of their landholding. There have been a number of misconceptions and concerns about solar farms over the past few years, particularly regarding food security. Solar farms can in fact support the farming industry and food security by lowering energy prices, continuing food production with sheep grazing, attracting pollinators to help crop growth, and addressing climate change, which is one of the leading causes of crop loss. The most recent DEFRA report on food security showed the biggest threats to food security in the UK are shortages of labour and increased costs of fertilisers, pesticides and fuel, not solar farms. There is enough land in the UK to accommodate our energy and our domestic food needs. The anticipated deployment of solar across the UK is expected to require just 0.3% of all UK land, which is less than space currently taken up by golf courses and equivalent to around 0.5% of land currently used for farming. I'm now going to hand over to Andy, who will talk about the project itself.
Hi everyone. So a bit about selecting this site. Our proposed site is located on land in between Ewan and Siddington. It lies across the parishes of Kemble and Ewan and Siddington. Despite what some people might think, solar irradiance levels are very good in this part of the UK, and this solar farm will be able to produce around 37,000 megawatt hours of energy per year. The total site covers approximately 47 hectares of land, about 115 acres or so, with about 25 hectares proposed for the solar infrastructure itself, and the remaining approximately 50% used for mitigation, biodiversity enhancements and screening, which we'll come on to a little bit later. We recognise that there are a couple of properties close to our proposed boundary, particularly on the southern side. We have already included landscaping, as well as leaving at least one field in between the properties in our solar farm, which is intended to screen the solar farm from views. We welcome further discussions with these residents to see if there's any more that we could be doing. Finding a suitable site for a solar farm can be very difficult, as there are many constraints that need to be sensibly considered and balanced. Indeed, locating sufficient capacity on the electricity network is always one of the most difficult challenges. As the electricity grid becomes increasingly saturated with renewable energy generation and the distribution network plays catch up, securing a grid connection, as we've done here with Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks, SSEN, is becoming increasingly challenging. We will be connecting into the substation at Cirencester, which is off Wilkinson Road, and that will require an underground cable from Cirencester substation to our solar site. Approximately 2/3 of that cable route will run through agricultural land, with the remaining third running alongside Spratsgate Lane and partly Wilkinson Road. This project is also on the grid side, one of a small remaining handful that is ready to connect immediately. So there's no long-term connection date, and there's also no wider transmission network reinforcements required. In terms of the site itself, the land is predominantly quite flat, with the largest proportion of it well hidden. Plus there is existing electrical infrastructure already on site in the form of overhead lines, both on poles and on pylons just to the west. The site also benefits from having the potential to accommodate additional screening and mitigation measures, such as additional tree belts and hedgerows, which will add to the net biodiversity gain delivered by the project. As well as the secured grid connection, the land is also suitable for development, as there are no landscape, heritage, or ecological designations within the site. Developing solar on agricultural land offers not only enough space to generate electricity, but it also allows us to boost biodiversity levels and actually improve habitats for wildlife. So on to the next slide. So what makes up a solar farm? So to explain the different components, there are several that make up a solar farm. Photovoltaic panels, we're proposing to use single axis tracker PV panels, which move in accordance with the position of the sun and help to maximize sunlight conversion and energy generation. These PV panels are set out in rows with enough space in between and underneath them for sheep to graze. Solar technology is advancing rapidly, and as such, we'll be using bifacial panels, which are on both sides, which allow higher efficiency in converting the available sunlight into solar energy. The panels will have a maximum height of 3.5 meters at their highest angle, though it is likely that this will be lower when it comes to construction. Between each row, there will be a minimum gap of 2.1 meters. This will enable the land to be grazed underneath throughout the lifetime of the project. Substation. Substation is where we connect into the grid work or our cable route. Inverters, these are located underneath the panels and convert the power from the direct current that's generated by the panels into alternating current that needs to be fed into the grid network. Transformers. Transformers are used to step the voltage up so it can be distributed into the grid network. This allows for a much more efficient transfer of energy across the grid network. Storage units, these contain spare parts. Generally, they're located in the vicinity of the substation. We are also proposing to include a small battery storage system, which will also be in the vicinity of the substation, and that would enable load shifting rather than importing from the grid. So it will enable us to further optimize the generated energy that's then exported into the electricity grid. Fencing, in terms of fencing, for security purposes, there'll be a 2-meter high fence around the perimeter of the site. This is in the style of a rural deer fencing with wooden fence posts and space for small mammals to pass through. Access tracks, we would have some new site access tracks built, although we'll be using existing routes and hedgerow gaps wherever possible. New access tracks would have the appearance of a typical farm track constructed from crushed stone and will be approximately 4 meters in width. The tracks are semi-permeable and will cover in grass over time. All cables that connect the panels to the transformers and then onto the substation will be underground and within the site. There is no security lighting when the solar farm is operational. The only lighting that may be in place will be during the construction period. However, as construction will mainly take place during daylight hours and is likely to be in the summer months, lighting requirements will be minimal. So on to the design. This solar farm will have an output of 25 megawatts, which is the equivalent to powering around 12,000 homes or around 12,000 electric cars every year. It will save around 7,000 tons of carbon entering the atmosphere compared with electricity generated via gas. panel arrays will only disturb a very small proportion of the ground itself, typically less than 1%, as it's only the posts which are placed into the ground for the panels to sit on top of the grass. This allows plenty of space for sheep to graze safely beneath them. The grass can still grow under the panels on a UK solar farm, despite the misconception that shades prevent it from doing so. And in fact, the panels can afford the sheep some protection from bad weather in the winter and protection from shade in the summer months. In terms of the panels themselves, we'll be using monocrystalline silicon-based panels, which have up to 99% recycling efficiency. The substation is located in the east of the site, and this is where we'll be connecting the electricity via an underground cable into the grid. As mentioned earlier, we'll be connecting into the SSEN's substation in Cirencester. The operational period of the solar farm will be 40 years. Once the end of the operational period is reached, the solar farm will be decommissioned and the land returned back to its former use. We believe that it is likely to be in better condition than it was before the solar farm, with more trees, more hedges, and enhanced wildlife. The soil will also have been rested, with no fertilizers and no pesticides used during the operational life of the development. In addition to the solar panels and associated infrastructure, the proposal will include a number of ecological and landscape enhancements, such as new hedgerow and tree planting, species-rich grassland and wildflowers. All existing hedgerows and trees in and around the site will be retained, other than where required for access. Existing hedgerows will be enhanced to make them more robust and allowed to grow up, as well as planting new trees for screening purposes. We're proposing to either improve or plant, where required, new hedgerows and trees in a number of locations to screen the solar farm from any views. These are predominantly located along the north and the southwestern boundaries. The improved grassland beneath and around the panels allows us significant gains in biodiversity as well as improved drainage. Wildflowers will be sown across the site to further boost biodiversity and attract much needed pollinators to help tackle the ecological crisis. Also proposing a number of bird and bat boxes to encourage nesting, as well as log piles, compost, and bug hotels for snakes and invertebrates. There are no footpaths or bridleways, either across or alongside the site. It should be noted that solar farms are very quiet, so we don't predict any adverse noise effects on any residences nearby. We welcome any suggestions from members of the public or local conservation groups on how we can maximize our biodiversity efforts and encourage local people to get involved in the monitoring of biodiversity, particularly much needed bee populations. And at this point, I will pass you over to my colleague, Harry.
Thanks, Andy. Hi, everyone. So let's take a look at the construction and access. So the construction of a solar farm will typically take place over about a 6-month period, and that's likely during the spring and summer months. Our current connection date is scheduled for autumn 2027. So if planning permission is granted in 2026, we'd aim for sort of the beginning of construction start in 2027, but we'll notify the local community well in advance. The route shown here is an indicative route from Cirencester along Wilkinson Road and Spratsgate Lane. We're then proposing to enter the site using one of the existing field entrances on Ewan Road along the southern boundary of our development. HGV movements will only happen outside of peak times, and a contact number will be made available for any residents who have any concerns over this period. Residents along the route in the vicinity of the solar farm will also be notified in advance of the construction. Where possible, we would use the existing field access tracks to reach areas of panels further within the solar farm site. And compacted stone will be used where existing access tracks are not adequate for HGVs. A traffic management plan will be implemented before construction and agreed with the council's highway authority. Most construction traffic will arrive on site within the first few weeks of construction, after which the number of HGVs will reduce significantly. As a solar farm requires little maintenance, after construction, there will be minimal traffic going into the site. Slide, please, Clay. Biodiversity. We're facing an ecological emergency as well as a climate emergency. A recent study by the Natural History Museum in London has shown that the UK has lost nearly half of its biodiversity since the Industrial Revolution. That's more biodiversity loss than any other G7 country, and it's in the worst 10% globally. We've also lost a staggering 97% of wildflower meadows since the 1930s. Political leaders are starting to take action and have committed to reversing biodiversity loss by 2030. Solar farms can significantly improve local biodiversity by providing new habitats and food for wildlife. A study by the Solar Trade Association discovered that some solar farms had up to 6 times more pollinators than adjacent fields without panels on. And a more recent study on 2 solar farms by the RSPB and the University of Cambridge found that well-managed solar farms had nearly 3 times the number of birds present compared with arable land nearby. Panels sit on tables, meaning there's a minimal disturbance to the ground beneath, which allows the grass to continue to grow and the ability for sheep to graze beneath them. It also means that solar panels are easy to remove at the end of their life with minimal disturbance to the natural environment. Existing agricultural land can be converted to species-rich pasture, therefore acting as a stable store of carbon, a dual benefit to combat climate change and boost biodiversity. As the fields are left fallow for the lifetime of the solar farm, the soil will be kept healthy, boost carbon sequestration, and after the solar farm has reached the end of its life, it can be removed with much of the equipment recyclable. The land will then be returned to its previous use in a substantially better ecological condition than before. We're proposing to either enhance or plant new hedgerows, as well as a number of new native trees and species-rich grassland with wildflowers. Bird and bat boxes are included as well, as set areas aside specifically for skylark habitats. A 3 to 5 metre buffer is included all around the perimeter of the site, along with suitable spacing between the panel arrays. This will greatly benefit local wildlife, and we predict a significant increase in biodiversity levels. A full biodiversity net gain calculation will be submitted with our application once we have finalised the layout and mitigation proposals. We aim for a net gain of 60+%, which is well in excess of the 10% which is required over baseline conditions. And on to the next slide. Great. Annual monitoring. So we'll be producing a landscape and ecological management plan, or a LEMP, which will be a condition on any approved planning application. This will ensure the biodiversity and ecological enhancements are maximised throughout the lifetime of the solar farm. The LEMP will specify things such as where and how existing vegetation will be enhanced, the density of new meadow, hedges and trees, the species mix for various habitats, how habitats will be protected during construction, and how habitats will be maintained through the project. The plan will be agreed with Cotswold District Council and will outline the management regime of the solar farm. Progression of the habitats will be monitored regularly and reports will be submitted to the council. The LEMP will regularly be reviewed and adapted if necessary to ensure the biodiversity aims are met. We also welcome local conservation charities who may be interested in our site to get in touch with regards to monitoring our wildlife populations. So on to the survey findings. We're undertaking a range of surveys which have helped inform our plans to date. These include ecology. So an extended phase 1 habitat survey has been undertaken so far. There are no ecological designations on site, and those in the wider area have been considered in determining the appropriate scope of surveys. We've undertaken a number of ecology surveys throughout the past year, including for habitats, birds, bats, badgers, and great crested newts. Buffers from existing ecological features, including trees and hedgerows, are included to protect habitats. Landscape. So a landscape assessment is underway and includes assessment of impacts on the landscape character and visual impact for residents, road and rail users, and users of public rights of way. A landscaping plan is proposed to minimise visibility of the site. Flood risk. The built development is located entirely within flood zone 1, meaning there is a very low risk of flooding from rivers or the sea. No high voltage equipment will be located where there may be a possibility of surface water flooding. Solar farms don't contribute to sort of flooding, as the arrays are designed with gaps to allow surface water to be evenly dispersed and absorbed by a healthy grass sward underneath. Solar farms can also include mitigation measures to help alleviate existing flooding. At our nearby Kemble site, we've included a flood alleviation scheme to reduce the existing off-site flood concerns. Noise. So a noise assessment has been carried out in accordance with industry standards to ensure any noise emitted is within statutory noise limits. Solar farms are very quiet and do not make any noise at all during the night time. Residential amenity is not expected to be negatively impacted, and there are no noise-related issues anticipated to arise during the solar farm's operation. It should be noted that with any construction project, there will inevitably be some noise disruption during the construction of the solar farm. However, we will do our utmost to minimise this and ensure local residents are well informed of the construction activity timings. Okay, heritage. A desk-based assessment and site visit has been undertaken to consider the potential impacts of the development on the designated and non-designated heritage assets. We're also in the process of undertaking a geophysical survey to determine the extent, if any, of archaeological interest across the site. Glint and glare. Solar panels are designed to absorb light rather than to reflect it. They're considered safe to install close to airports and near major roads. The reflection from a solar farm is much less than commercial greenhouses, polytunnels, and even grass. From a distance, they appear in the landscape similar to a ploughed wet field or a small lake. An assessment of potential impacts upon road, rail, residential, and aviation receptors will be undertaken upon the final site layout design. Any potential impacts will be mitigated either through panel removal or tree hedgerow planting. Agricultural land. We're in the process of undertaking a soil analysis to determine the exact grading of the soil. The farmer has informed us that due to the land's poor drainage, soil fertility is low and unreliable of producing consistent yields of combinable crops. The crops that have been grown have been predominantly wheat, which is used for animal feed, spring barley, used for malting, and spring beans, used for animal feed. I'll now pass back to Chloe.
Great, thanks very much, Harry and Andy. So on to local benefits. So as well as the enriched biodiversity that we've heard from Harry, there are a number of other local benefits that this solar farm could bring. So the solar farm would contribute to the local economy, and we'd use local contractors where possible. We also feel it's important to contribute directly to the local community via community fund. The community fund is based on a £400 per megawatt basis, which in this instance would equate to £10,000 per year, which is index linked, and that's for the lifetime of the solar farm. So for the 40 years of this project, that would total over £400,000. This is significantly higher than what we have seen as an industry standard. This is encouraged to be spent locally on social and environmental projects, though there have been instances where it's been used to contribute to local people's energy bills. Typical projects that have been funded by other solar farm projects include energy efficiency measures on public buildings, play equipment for children, church restoration, and fibre optic broadband. The administration of these funds will be managed locally, typically by the parish council or an independent trust, and we welcome further discussions with the parish council and local residents on this matter. If you have any suggestions for how the fund could be spent, or are a local supplier who would like to be considered in our tendering process, then please do get in touch. We also want to help enthuse the younger generation and educate them on the importance of renewable energy. As such, we would like to encourage school visits to the proposed solar farm and educational sessions to local schools about the importance of renewable energy. If you are or know of a teacher from a local school who's interested in participating, then we would love to hear from you. Also important to note that this solar farm will contribute around £50,000 in business rates to Cotswold District Council each year. Okay, so on to projected timescales. So consulting with the local community is critical to designing the best possible scheme, and your feedback is really important to us. So following this consultation and tomorrow's consultation event, we will look to incorporate the comments received from the local community and interested parties into our proposal and revise our designs if feasible and refine them. We'll then finalise our proposed design and aim to submit our planning application before the end of April. After the application is submitted, Cotswold District Council will undertake their own consultation process and invite local residents to comment on the plans. We will continue to work with the planning officer and statutory consultees once submitted to address any comments raised. Our aim is to submit a proposal which not only complies fully with the local plan and the national planning policy framework, but one which the local community can support. The planning determination period for developments of this scale can be unpredictable, but we hope to have a decision at the start of next year. If approved, we would anticipate construction to begin in the spring of the following year, 2027, with the intention to complete in time for our grid connection window in the autumn of 2027. As Harry mentioned, typically a solar farm of this size could take somewhere between 3 to 6 months, probably erring on the 6 months side of the scale to complete. However, this does not account for delays, which might be out of our control, such as the Great British Weather. If you would like to speak to us in person, we will be holding the in-person exhibition at Siddington Village Hall tomorrow, and that will be from 4 till 7 p.m. If this isn't convenient and you'd still like to speak to us separately, then we do encourage you to get in touch with us directly. We'll also keep you updated on the progress of the development by email as we move through the next phases. And then should planning permission be approved and we move to construction, local residents will also be notified by letter at that point. Okay, so we've reached the end of our presentation, and thank you to everybody for listening. We'll now answer any questions that you have. If you haven't done so already, please type your question using the Q&A button. You should have found it already. It's a little speech button, and then I'll read that question out, and either myself, Harry, or Andy will answer the question for you. Hopefully we can answer all the questions during the session, but if we're unable to, then please do contact us. Okay. Question number 1 here. Community Benefit Fund detail contract with councils based on actual generation or the 25 megawatt capacity. When does this commence? On completion and connection to the grid, or when? If the solar farm is sold, does the contract transfer to new owners? Okay, so thank you. That's a really excellent question. So the Community Benefit Fund is based on the 25 megawatt export capacity. So that's where the £10,000 come from. It's a multiplier of the £400 per megawatt basis. That typically commences 1 year after the generation. So it's a small proportion, obviously, of the revenue produced from the operation of the solar farm. So that will be tied into a Community Benefit Fund agreement that we would have in place between the SPV, which is ultimately the project owner, regardless of who that might be, and the entity that administers that Community Benefit Fund, whether that be the parish council or a separate independent trust. And that Community Benefit Fund agreement will ensure that that Community Benefit Fund is delivered throughout the operation of the solar farm. Okay, so another question here. Planning regime and planning timelines may change this year and lead to permission being granted earlier, e.g. in 2025. If this happens, will you be able to start building sooner than 2027? I'm going to hand that question over to Harry, if you don't mind, or Andy, chip in as well if you like.
I can jump in and take that one. So yes, if we were granted planning permission this year, for example, we would hope that we could start building sooner. However, long lead items such as the transformer, there are, with the supply chains at the minute, long lead items tend to be about maybe 12 months. So with the best will in the world, it might be tricky to energize before 2027, but potentially we can hopefully start construction in 2026 if all goes well, and potentially energize it in 2027, early 2027 maybe. I would say that the DNOs also don't move quite as fast as we move, perhaps, which is what we've experienced on our Kemble project. So, you know, we can only go as fast as the DNO will act as well. So I think those two things combined will make it trickier to be much earlier than construction late 26 and connection in 27.
Thanks, Andy. Another question here, will there be a buffer zone against the roads? If so, how many meters? Harry, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. So I assume this isn't the internal roads. We're talking about Ewan Road and Spratsgate Lane here. Generally, I mean, we'd have our panels set back a pretty good way from any external road. There'll be hedgerows and fencing also in between. So as a general rule, we'd have our panels probably about at a minimum 5 meters from the fencing, which then has to have a good few meters gap from the hedgerows, and then onto the roads. Yeah, I mean, I'd probably expect between sort of, you know, a minimum of 10 to 15 meters from the external roads. Internally, the roads would probably set back about 5 meters or so. Yeah.
Thanks, Harry. That actually looks like the end of our questions. Just going to leave a couple more minutes in case, oh, there's another one just come in here. Is it your intention to allow roadside trees to grow so you would not actually see the panels at all when driving? Yes, that is indeed the intention. We would allow all surrounding vegetation to grow. And as we mentioned during the design slide, there is the proposal to include additional tree planting and also enhancing the hedgerows to allow them to grow more and become more robust and ultimately do the best possible job at screening the solar farm entirely from view. Okay, is the access to the site just the one point from the Ewan Road? Harry, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so we're figuring this out currently. At the moment, we've got 2 proposed access points. Yeah, so we're exploring both options, working with a transport consultant to effectively figure out which one's the most, well, which is the best, basically. But yes, both are on Ewan Road currently. Well, Spratsgate Lane, I think, is too fast and too busy of a road to propose any access, and there also aren't any existing field accesses off Spratsgate Lane. So we sought to utilise those existing gates where possible.
Thanks, Harry. A question here, how deep do you dig for the wires?
Yeah, I can take that one. I mean, typically the wires are buried to a depth of about 1.2 meters. So it depends. I mean, it depends whether we're talking within our site or our cable route from our site to the substation. But from our site to the substation, we'd probably expect to be, like I say, definitely below a meter, potentially about 1.2 meters. Within our site, it will probably be less than that, as obviously you know, there's no danger of anyone coming into contact with those wires other than us during our lease.
Thanks, Andy. Another question here, can you plant the trees ahead of time, e.g. this year? Yeah, that's an excellent question. So we can only start doing anything on the land ultimately when we've entered the lease, which typically wouldn't be until we've secured project financing, and that comes obviously after planning permission is approved. I will give the example at Kemble Solar Farm. So we actually started planting the trees there at the beginning of the year to enable the trees to give a little bit more of a head start with the growth ahead of construction starting later this year in April. So we do like to give a little bit of a head start. We will allow the existing hedgerows there to grow up already from this point forward. Another question, there is a field access on Spratsgate Lane.
Yeah, so while that may be true, our transport consultants have deemed it too fast of a road and too tight of a turn to use as a viable access to our site. That's why we're using the Ewan Road instead.
Thanks, Harry. Another question, how many people are on this webinar, excluding yourselves? So I have here that there are 7 attendees. Obviously, this will be recorded as well, and people are able to watch that at any other point. Okay, I think that's the end. I'll just give a couple moments in case anybody else has any other questions.
I think I'd just add an extra point to the field access on Spratsgate Lane. I've just done a triple check, and we didn't believe there are any suitable accesses along Spratsgate Lane, and there aren't any that sort of align with our proposed solar site area. So i.e. if they're further north, then they're outside of our site area. But as Harry obviously alluded to as well, due to the speed of the road, it's also not conducive in any event.
Thanks, Andy. Okay, so that brings us to the end this evening, and thank you ever so much to all of our attendees for your time. As I mentioned at the beginning, we'd be grateful if you could complete our short survey, which I'll send round probably tomorrow, along with the presentation slides and the link to the recording. If there is anything else that you would like to discuss with us in more detail, then please do not hesitate to get in touch. My contact details are here on the screen. As I've already said, we'll be at the Village Hall in Siddington tomorrow, where we'll ultimately be presenting the same information as we have done this evening, but also be available to talk to in more detail in person. And if you are watching the recorded version, you can find the feedback questionnaire on our website. Just to note that your personal details will not be passed on to any third parties and will only be used for the purpose of this public consultation and further updates on the project. So thanks again, and have a lovely evening and good night.
Thanks all.